word you use?
Spoilers.
Spoilers. Spoilers. Spoilers. Spoilers. Spoilers. I like that word.
I thought you might.
Hello everyone and welcome back to another Missing Presumed Lost, and today we'll be mixing fact and fiction, history and legend with the myth makers. The Mythmakers is a story that I personally don't hold in very high regard, but I do think there is a good reason for this. You see, it's not a fault of the story itself, which is actually very good. It's the fact that a story that is so action-packed has had the misfortune to become lost. With a story taking place during a particularly well-known, albeit mythological war, it is a story that is very heavy on action in various ways, both through actual physical action and also its dialogue. As such, its nature as a missing story, now only viewable in stills reconstructions, does leave it feeling that there is something missing in an otherwise perfect formula. As a story, The Mythmakers is very much once again the bread and butter of Doctor Who. The Doctor and his companions get separated, they must find each other again, resolve the events they find themselves in, and then escape. And this story is often remembered as seeing the somewhat surprise departure of Vicky and the introduction of new, albeit soon to be short-lived companion, Katerina. However, what does make this story stand out for me is how the mythical Odyssey is supposedly transformed into a real-life event. Not only do we get to see such characters from the Odyssey, such as Achilles and Odysseus himself, as real-life people, but also concepts such as the mythical Cyclops and the Trojan horse are also given real-world twists. Whilst the idea of real-world fictional events being part of the narrative universe of Doctor Who is something that we find commonplace these days, as a concept in an early classic historical story of Doctor Who, it actually works very well. Because whilst it is historical in setting, its mythological basis and how this idea weaves into the narrative of the story, it actually does work very well compared to other historical stories. I mean, hence the name. It is a myth made real. As previously mentioned at the start of this theory, sadly all 4 episodes of The Mythmakers are missing from the BBC archive. And despite my overall opinion of this story not being very high, and as I said, there is a very good reason for that, I certainly think that this is a story that deserves an animated reconstruction sooner rather than later. You see, with this story taking place during the Trojan War, there is a fair amount of action in it, as in both skirmishes, battles and confrontations befitting the setting, but also as part of the narrative plot. However, with the episodes missing, a stills reconstruction, even with subtitles, is very limited in the amount of action that it can actively portray. As such, it does mean that this story falls somewhat flat into comparison to other action-packed stories. However, one day, if we did in fact get an animated reconstruction, or even we were lucky enough to have at least some of the episodes found, then fully viewable action scenes would certainly add more draw to the story, and I think then perhaps my opinion of the story may even reach the highest peaks of the Walls of Troy. Now, this is a story with a good amount of trivia, but I thought for this I would choose something suitably timey-wimey. Early on in the story, when the idea of the Trojan horse comes up, the Doctor dismisses the idea, saying that the horse is most likely a myth.
Why not the wooden horse? No, my dear boy, I couldn't possibly suggest that. The whole story is obviously absurd. Probably invented by Homer as some good dramatic device.
Invented as nothing more than a literary trope, as part of the Odyssey by Homer. No, not that one. However, later in the story, when having his life threatened, the Doctor suggests the idea of a wooden horse to Agamemnon's army to hide in.
Have you ever thought of a horse? It should be a huge horse, about 40 feet high. Yes, that's quite an idea, Doctor.
An event which would later go on to be described by Homer in the Odyssey. This means that the idea of the Trojan horse within the narrative of the episode is in fact an ontological or bootstrap paradox. That is to say, it has no discernible creation point, and yet it still exists. Because you see, the Doctor takes the idea of the Trojan horse from Homer's account, which, relative to the time period the story is set in, has yet to be written. But as the Doctor is simply relaying the idea from Homer's accounts, he is in fact unknowingly creating the very events that Homer will later write about. Although later in Underworld, the 4th Doctor states that he didn't come up with this idea.
Well, it's not my plan exactly, but it has worked before. A fellow called Ulysses pulled it off a little while ago.
This is still technically accurate, as from his perspective of his first incarnation of the time, he didn't invent the idea, he simply passed on what he believed Homer had invented. I have talked about ontological and bootstrap paradoxes before, and while some people do get it, it does confuse a lot of people. So think of it this way. It's like a circle. I'm sure some of you are expecting me then to say big ball of wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey stuff, but no, think of it as a circle. The Doctor gets the idea from Homer, but Homer only wrote about it because the Doctor inadvertently created those events. And so Homer writes about it, which is where the Doctor gets the idea from, and so on and so forth. Now I'm sure some people will say this does mean that the first Doctor invented the Trojan horse. However, for that to be the case, he would have to be unaware of the idea before he passed it on, and for the idea of the Trojan horse to be solely his idea, which it wasn't. If you still don't get it, well, then you probably never will. So the Mythmakers, a tale to stand the test of time, or one that will pass into myth and legend like the stories of old? Well, as it currently stands as a story that is only really available in unofficial stills reconstructions, it's not one that's high on my list of recommendations. But as I said before, if this story ever gets a reconstruction or an animation, then it is certainly one that I would recommend viewing, because the action that it is currently missing now, once restored, will certainly add not only a lot more to the story, but also to the overall experience of watching it. But that brings to a close another Missing Presumed Lost. As always, I hope you all enjoyed this video. Like, favorite, subscribe, share, it really helps me out a lot, and be sure to check the description below for a link to my Patreon. I'm doing my very first figure animation, and you can get involved. There is exclusive content and rewards for those who do so, and funding my Patreon in any way gets your name at the end of my videos. I salute you all, and I will see you with another video very soon.